Hey everyone, Josh here with the NOYC GODcast, where we share a wacky wisdom from God's Word each week. On today's episode, we'll take a look at being fail-vailable as we give God our failures for His fantastic peace. Stay tuned. So we sort of talked about this on the first episode of the month, but do we realize that failure is a part of our walk with faith?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's like it's actually a ingredient in the recipe of righteousness, if you will. So in other words, if we succeeded in all that we do, if we always got it right, if we never failed or had a reason to doubt, then we really would have no need for faith.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which is the whole point of a relationship with God. And so it's in the failures that God proves his value. It's in the failures that God proves his grace. It's in the failures of life that God receives his due glory. And so what I want us to talk about today is this. Are we willing to be a failure for the Father? It's kind of what I want to talk about. Are we allowed to ask that? Like, in a Christian culture that's telling you can be your best you now, you can have your best life now, you can be all that you dream to be, you can rub the lamp and have lots of things. Rachel's concerned.
Always.
It's
true.
Are we willing to be a failure for the Father? Or I guess the even better question is, would God ever want us to be a failure?
Yes, because it goes back to what you just now said. Without failure, there's no faith. There's no, I mean, if we just went through life and everything went our way, like, why would we ever need to pray or do anything?
That's what I tell the boys all the time with school is because like Casey gets mad if he gets a certain amount of spelling words wrong. I'm like, well, every time you get it wrong, that's an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
You can learn the right way.
Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn.
Yeah, exactly right. And so God's not so much interested in our looking good. I don't think we realize that. Like even, our church is not like most churches, but like even, when you're up there fumbling or something, like it's something embarrassing happens. You crack in a song. As I do.
When the song starts way too quickly.
Yeah, you're not on stage. Or you sing the total wrong words or
you
lose
trip
your
over
place.
the microphone.
Yeah, you trip over the microphone, laugh into the microphone, it's fine.
When did this happen?
I tripped over the cord and I laughed in the microphone when I sat down at the piano.
Today?
No. This was a while
Could
ago.
you repeat? Because me and Kevin missed it.
Yeah.
But God
Lead an
doesn't
encore.
so much care about us looking good. Like you look at churches today and it's a performance. Everything's pristine and squeaky and perfect. And like God is all about perfection. That's not what I'm saying. But he's all about perfection for himself. He doesn't so much care about us looking good. He doesn't care so much about us getting an applause or getting prestige or even being impressive to people. In fact, at times, God will actually allow you to experience setbacks that are so horrific that we can't see how any good could come of it. He'll allow things to happen in your life that are so bad, it's unbelievable. And you think nothing good can come out of this. And yet God says, if you'll give me the horrific, I'll make it heavenly. If you give me this awful experience, I'll make it awesome. And so it's a lesson for each of us that you have to take the bad in order to get to the good.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we've been talking about this month. I know in the first episode and James' episode last week, we talked about, personal failures and how we all fail. Jonah was a failure. And we talked about, I had a long list of failures. And so we're all failures. And that's kind of what we're talking about, how God can take our mess ups, our failures, and make us fantastic. But this week, I want to kind of look at more of failures that are maybe out of your control a little more, things that happen in life that are just beyond what we can make happen. So this morning, our pastor preached a message. It was a very familiar story that we all know, the story of Joseph.
Yes.
And how Joseph was given a promise from God. And then for years, in fact, for most of Joseph's life, Joseph had to go through life looking like that promise were not true. And so we find that Joseph tells his brothers, one day you will bow down to me. He even tells the rest of his family this will be the case. And so, he's kind of put himself out there. In the meantime, Joseph finds himself in a pit. He finds himself in a prison. He finds himself in shackles and situations that make it look like Joseph was a failure. It made him look like what God had said was totally wrong and not true. It made Joseph appear wrong, arrogant, and a liar. And to be honest, it really made Joseph look bad. Like it ruined his character. Or I'm going to say his character, but it ruined his reputation. It ruined, his God has spoken, and then everything opposite of what God has said happens. And so Joseph really didn't look very good in this whole story.
I have to wonder, like, in listening to that story, even this morning, I'm sitting there thinking, like, was his wagon ahead of his horse. Okay.
Yeah.
So like God talks to him and tells him all these things, and then he immediately runs out and tells like his brothers like, you're gonna bow down to me one day.
Right.
Like maybe if he could just kind of
Let's wait for some proof of that.
like just kind of keep that to yourself. You know what I mean? Because but then again, like the whole point to the message was he believed God, and if he would have kept it to himself,
They never would have put him in the pit, which would have never led to the palace.
Right? Yeah. So like he would not have faced his failures, so to speak, if he would not have outspoken.
I think we read the story. I was kind of thinking about this more too. We read the story and we think, man, Joseph's kind of arrogant. Like, you will bow down to me, your younger little brother. And yet, like, I have to believe because God blessed that, it wasn't so much arrogance as it was belief in God, like as much as it was faith. And so what I want us to grasp is that Joseph looked like a failure throughout most of his life. He looked like he had a false word from God. He looked like he had just totally made a mess of everything and ruined his own life. And yet Joseph was willing to have his reputation ruined. Do we see that? He's willing to do this. He was willing to see his life run through the mud for one reason. God promised something fantastic.
Yep.
I'm looking to that. I'm going through this here, but I'm looking to that there. And so the question becomes this: what will we do in the waiting? That was kind of the message this morning at our church. But the time between what we see and what we feel and what we experience and our failures to the time of his fantastic masterpiece. What are we going to do with that? And so too often we get so wrapped up in us.
Yeah.
What we fail to realize is that what God wants is what matters. And so how many of us are willing to experience God-ordained failures? God, just like Joseph, God is saying, all right, this is my plan. You fail. This is my plan. You look terrible. This is my plan. Your reputation is ruined. This is my plan. Everything I said looks like it's false. That's God's literal plan.
Yeah.
How many of us are willing to go through that? Any signers, any takers, like to put that thing back? And to just have our names and our reputations run through the mud and to have our plans totally ruined. Why? To bring God glory.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
I think it's mandatory that we have these failures and trials and tribulations as we go through it because, like I said before, if it was just like easy, you know what I mean? If, it's like, okay, my brothers are going to bow down before me, and they start bowing before him. It's like that was pretty easy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So really, for God, like it's all about his glory and about others seeing his glory.
Right.
So if we look at someone who's extremely successful, you know what I mean? And they just remain successful and keep going. Like, we don't see the trials and tribulations that they had to go through. And so therefore there is no, it's like, well, yeah, God did it, but there's no real like evidence of it. You know what I'm saying? So as a Christian, when you're trying to testify to a non-believer, I think it's especially effective if you can point to a point in your life when you were going through your trials and tribulations and how God and only God saw you through it. You know what I mean? It just puts more validation on God's name to a non-believer because he doesn't need more validation.
I think we like to share how God comes through in the impossible ways, but we don't like to share the part that we failed.
The process.
Yeah. God did the impossible in this situation where it doesn't show your failures, but once it's a failure that God did the impossible, that's where like, well, he did something impossible, but you don't really need to know.
Yeah, you don't need to know how he did it.
But
you just need to know he was faithful. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, but them knowing, like a non-believer knowing the failures makes it very relatable to them.
Well, and kind of like we talked about in the first episode of the series, God was intentional in putting those failures into the Bible.
Yes.
And so he's intentional in putting those in our own lives, just like you said, to use as a canvas for his glory to non-believers or believers. Yeah. But what I want us to realize, so we're talking about Joseph, obviously, but I want us to realize, think of Job. Would you say Job's life was a life of failure or fantastic? Well, for the first 40 chapters, failure. Lots and lots of bad things.
Yeah.
And again, just like Joseph is beyond Job's control, it wasn't anything self-inflicted. But for literally 40 chapters, it's just like, oh my goodness, God really doesn't like this guy. Like, he's just really sticking it to him. But then you get to the end of the book, and all of a sudden, just like Joseph, after Job endures, chapters 41, 42, we see it's fantastic. Yep. Job is given double what he had before, but it took the process of failure to get to the fantastic.
So we've lived life, like humans been around for a little bit. Where did it turn that life was supposed to be easy?
Yeah.
When did that happen?
What guy came up and said that?
Yeah, because like you in the Bible and everything, you see all these failures, you see the struggle, you see the process, because that's how life is.
The funny thing is, like, absolutely, you don't actually find anyone in the Bible who didn't have that
No.
at all. And then you look down through history and like, okay, fine, after the Bible closed, it got easy. Nope, that's not the case. But the funny thing is, like, we even today, like, even in our churches, we're surprised when things are hard.
Yeah.
We're totally taken off guard when things are difficult. And it's like, no, that's the norm. That's the expectancy because that gives God the glory.
Well, and that's the thing is like when I think, and I don't know, I think we've talked about this before, I think, but it's like the whole thing of you have to live a perfect life, because if you live for God, then everyone needs to know that your life is good all the time, because that's just the way it is. It's not supposed to, your life is not supposed to be good all the time. You are supposed to feel content at all times.
Right.
Yeah, that's a
big
very
difference.
good.
It's a very big difference, and that's what we're supposed to be showing. Not that, hey, my life is perfect all the time. It doesn't matter what my life is going through.
And
I'm
that would
good.
be Joseph, right? Joseph's life was not everything's going well.
Yeah.
Goodness no. Joseph's life was not.
I've never been thrown in a pit. I've been put in a box and put in the field.
That's another story for another day.
I said it was taped too.
Take it up.
It may have been stabbed a couple times with a knife. It's fine. But go on.
Kevin's like,
so much. Right? Okay.
but Joseph's life was not described as good. His life was not described as going well.
Yeah.
The opposite. But it was described by contentment.
Yeah.
In the pits, in prison, he was content. And that's what James, exactly right. Contentment should mark the Christian, not necessarily mountaintops, experiences, blessings, and good things all the time. That's just not going to be the case.
Think when you're in contentment, you can project, God's goodness, through your contentment.
Well, and contentment is an appreciation of what's going wrong.
Right, exactly.
Like, and that's what Paul says. In all things, I've found myself to be content. Why? Well, Paul went through some really bad things.
Yeah.
And he's finding contentment in the bad. And so that's exactly Joseph, like finding satisfaction even in the horribleness.
Well, and that's the thing is like, so I was actually just talking to Lucas. So, I think that you two know, but I don't think Kevin knows.
Mewtwo. Isn't that a Pokemon, Mewtwo?
Yes, it is.
Oh, is it really? I was just guessing.
I backed into my garage door.
Yeah.
I
And
heard the abbreviated version.
yeah, and so I backed into my garage door because I couldn't see it. It tore off the spoiler off the top of my van. Now, here's the thing. Ice cream?
You said top.
Did I?
Like a kitten. I just get distracted
top.
by every laser beam that flies through
I
it.
was like, ice cream. But anyway, when you're content in things, did I love that I backed into my garage door? No. Am I thankful that I have to replace the top part? No, but it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
Yes.
It could have been I completely damaged the back of my van. It could have been that I couldn't use the garage door anymore. It could have been like finding you'll find the blessings.
The house backed into your van, which would be very bad.
Listen, I think I would have made
Houses
money.
don't move.
I think I would have made money that way. But it's finding, if you're content, it doesn't matter what you're going through, you're going to find the blessing in it.
Yeah.
Yes. Which, like, this goes back to like the story that our infamous leg across the road story. Okay. So, like, finding contentment, like Jamie just said, is like you look at it could have been a lot worse, but also you recognize your position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
whether you're in the pit or in the fire, whatever, like you can recognize your position, okay, and know beyond a doubt that God is still with you.
Yes.
Yeah, that's key. That's absolutely key. And that really, I would say that is like, if Joseph were to write a autobiography and summarize on the back of the book what it's about, that would be it. Like just saying, find your position, find your placement in Christ, and then let the pieces fall where they may. Find your contentment in that, not in all the moving parts and pieces.
Yeah, like don't worry where the pieces lay. Don't
Yeah.
try to control
Yeah.
where the pieces lay.
Trust the author.
Trust that it's going to work out.
So I hope you guys will help with this, especially Squeaky Reach. I want to talk a little bit, make this a little bit more personal for all of us. So I think we all, like, I know you shared last week and you were going to share this week about some personal failures as far as like we've actually messed up. We've
there's a
actually
lot more.
sinned. And I think we all could, like me and Kevin could I'm sure. I don't need to
How
say
many
sure.
times you gonna say sure?
I'm sure that we both could share. That's what I'm trying to. It's two different words. They will come out eventually. You don't think so?
I don't think so. It's fine.
But we could also share failures, sins, mistakes we've made that God has redeemed. That's not so much what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is kind of the Joseph scenario, the Job scenario, the Paul scenario, where things happen that are just unfortunate and make us look bad, make us look like failures, make us look like we totally went berserk, but God did it intentionally so that he could get glory.
Yeah.
So one example that I have, that stings a little, but I don't know if I've ever shared it on here. I've anyways, so I worked, it's probably been 6 years ago or so. I worked for a law office here locally. And I actually really liked the job. It was an office job. I have I actually went to college after high school and got a bachelor's degree in business administration. And so, even in that, it's ironic because that was a total waste and a failure. But that's another story for another day. So I worked at this law office. Long story short, I'd worked there for a long, long time. I enjoyed the type of work. It was a very toxic environment, to put it very, very, very lightly. And so, long story short, because of some very unfortunate circumstances, if you asked the employer, they would say, I made a mistake. I wasn't really given the opportunity to explain. And really, it wasn't that I made a mistake. It was that they didn't see how I was doing it. But regardless, it looked like I'd made a mistake. And ultimately, I walked away from the job because it was so horrendous of a situation. That was hard. That was one of the hardest things I've ever been through in my entire life. We hadn't been married very long, or we had been married for a little while then. I think Juliet, we had just had. And so, I'm supposed to be the breadwinner. I'm supposed to be providing for my family. And so, to walk away from income, just that did not make sense at all. And then the embarrassment of, you have a business degree and like you're failing in business and like you supposedly made this mistake and the whole thing was just unfortunate. And ultimately, like in the business world and at that law office, I looked like a failure. Even to come to the church, like, why isn't Josh working? It's Monday morning. Because he doesn't have a job anymore. Josh looked pretty pathetic and like a failure. You fast forward, as painful as that was and what seemed like it endured forever, God actually used that in a crazy quick timeline to now give me my dream job that I've always wanted my entire life, and that's to work for the Lord full-time in ministry. And I've been in full-time ministry for 5 years now. 5-6 years now. And that came out of this horrific failure. And so God took this awful thing, what the enemy meant for evil, and he used it for his good. And so that's kind of a personal thing in my life that God's used for good. Does anybody else have something? That's not good. Kevin, save me.
Wow, I have like so many to pick and choose from. So I guess like the one I'll pick is that when I first moved to Ohio, I got a job and I liked it, you know what I mean, and everything. But as time went on, because I was the stickler for so I worked in fast food. I was a manager in fast food, and like I always try to look at things from like the customer's point of view.
We appreciate
right? So whereas in like you're told like it's fast food, like you got to hurry up, you have to, you know what I mean? Like you have to move this, like they have like a clock there, and you have to keep those cars moving, right? And I used to always say, well, let's take an extra few seconds to make sure we get it right, because I don't care if you don't want ketchup on your hamburger and we get it to you in record time. That hamburger
still a fail.
It's a fail, you know what I mean? Because now you have to like go back through, which takes even longer. Like I was known
just by this description, I can guess which fast food restaurant you work at.
Okay. So anyway,
they've not changed at all.
No. So like whenever like a customer came in with a bag already, the other managers would like scatter. Okay, but I was always the one to walk up to them and say, and then of course they're like, whatever, you put ketchup on a hamburger, yada, yada, yada. So, like, I kind of looked at it as like, okay, well, we made a mistake, and this is delaying you from wherever you're trying to get to, whatever you're trying to accomplish. Okay. So I'm going to throw, like, a free something of, to try to, like, I can't give you your time back.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But I can give you.
I'll give you a free ketchup packet since you don't want ketchup on your burger. That's why I could never work at fast food.
I always appreciate the free gifts.
Yeah.
So that became frowned upon, okay? And I'm like, but it doesn't make sense because we have to, like, okay, I get it. People are still going to come here regardless of how many times we screw up. But we shouldn't have that mentality, okay? So that just kind of just kept growing and growing and growing. And then, like Josh, I just woke up one morning. Well, actually, I was in drive-thru one day, and we had gotten into it over this. And I'm standing back and I'm like, my days at this job are numbered. Yeah. Okay. And then like 2 weeks later, I was just like, I'm not coming back no more. Yeah. Okay. So I walked away from a job and, where I needed the income. Okay, I definitely needed the income, but I felt as though doing it right, you know what I mean? Even though I was not heavily involved in the church at that time, doing it right was more important to me than just, half doing it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So now when I look back on that through more like heavenly eyes and everything, it's like I look at it and I say, like, did I fail at that? I don't think I necessarily failed, but it was viewed as, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, to this day, if I walk into this establishment, the owner still won't speak. Like, his wife will, hey, how you doing? Yeah. But he just kind of gives me the, the shifty eyes and walks away, So I don't feel as though, like, similar to Josh, like, I don't think as though I did anything wrong, but it was, like, out of my control as to what happened. And like I said, so like, look at this, like, heavenly, like, there are times when we go through something, and even though we know, like, listen, this is not, according to God, and we're trying to apply this to the world. Okay, so that's like you're asking for failure right then and there, but we still have to have the courage to stand up and say, listen, this is not right, and I'm not going to do this job anymore. And the world looks at you like, you're going to quit this job?
Right.
Like,
I think it's important to bring up that the world's definition of success and the world's definition of failure should not be the same as a Christian.
Yeah.
It's not.
And that's something that I think we all need to kind of reckon with and reason with in our own lives, because if you're working off the world's definition, you're always going to be a failure in the eyes of God.
Yep.
But if you're working off of God's vision, you're always going to be a failure in the world's eyes. Yep. But you can have it both ways. We've been learning in Sunday school for a few weeks now that God's ways are not our ways. We are of earth, earthy, and He is of heaven, heavenly. And those two things are in total opposition to each other. And so we have to choose whose definition of success and failure we want to be on.
And if it gives you any kind of actually, I think Mom may have put it on Facebook. I can't remember, but she said that life is the shortest thing you're going to do.
Yep.
And so you might as well choose the right side.
Yeah,
so if you might as well be in the right on His end, not in the world's end, because this world is as a vapor.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, right. That's a very good point. I like to think of it as, like, I used to try to explain to people is that no matter how you view things, okay, whether you believe you're going to die and be dead, or you're going to go to heaven, or you're going to, like, whatever you believe, that's going to be longer than your life. Yep. Eventually.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you live to be 110 years old, eventually 110 years will pass after your death, and then you've been dead
longer than you've been alive.
So
spoken like a true dead person.
Right. So, like, no matter how you add it up, you know what I mean? Like, what you do with your time.
I think I loved that. I actually started to say that at the end of Sunday school this morning, but it was basically like, your life now will be the shortest part of your existence.
Yeah.
And that really puts things into perspective for us. So this might be a little soon. But let's talk about the NOYC 2022.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And
then last year was 21. We went from 21 to 23.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
So this is the thing, and I don't know who watches this besides Missy and Renee. Miguel. Hi,
Miguel.
Miguel.
Yeah.
Miguel.
But so if you were at...
Your mom watches.
Yes. Yeah. Her name's Renee. That's what I said.
Okay.
Kevin learned something today. My mom's first name. So if you were there, so this is what happened. NOYC 2022, we had a record-breaking year. We had like almost 500 people there. The week started off great. Things were going so well, smoothly even. And then Monday night, God sends a tornado. Literally touches down on the camp, rips the campground to shreds. Unbelievable. Like, still unbelievable.
Trees everywhere.
Unbelievable. Shreds the campground, takes out the electric for a week almost for several days, almost a full week. And so now here we are, almost 500 people at a torn apart campground with no electricity.
And the next day was supposed to be
heat advisory.
Yeah, and it was that's right. The week was a record breaker for heat. That we had people passing out from heat strokes the day before. The day after was supposed to be even hotter with no AC. So here we are, a ministry. We call ourselves God's Youth Camp.
Yep.
And we say this is God's camp. It's His reputation on the line. And what does God do? He sends us a failure.
Yep.
And maybe it's too soon to talk about that, but here we are. Like, I think, again, I don't know who watches this, but I think even some of those 500 people who were there, they look at last year as a failed year of camp. Yeah. They look at the NOYC as a failed ministry. The ball was dropped. I've heard people say that. We didn't make the right call. We didn't please God. And yet, again, we think of Joseph and we think of Job and we think of Paul. Sometimes God sends failures in order for our faith to be built. Sometimes he sends failures in order for God to receive glory. And so last year was painful, still painful, still salt in the wound. Don't want to talk about it. Let's just smile and move on. And yet, did God ordain that?
Yes.
If you look at a big picture, like if you zoom out some of the behind the scenes things that we know, God used, so we had camp for Sunday and Monday. And normally it would be Sunday to Friday. So in 2 days, God did what he would normally do in 5 days. We saw 30 plus people saved. We saw a young man call into the ministry to preach, a young lady called to the mission field. We saw countless people on the altars and just doing business with the Lord. We also saw, if you watched, and I don't know if CJ can pipe this in or not, but we also saw the radar of what actually happened that night. And so if you watch it, it's kind of become an infamous little take here in Ohio. I actually, outside of Ohio, I had a guy from Buffalo, New York. Never met the guy in my life. Walk up to me and he's like, and we were talking about ministry and stuff. He's in ministry, and I told him the name of the camp. He's like, "Is that the tornado camp?" I'm like,
The tornado camp.
Yes, tornado.
That's us. That's us. We're
We
the
are the
tornado
tornado
camp, not
camp.
the reputation we were hoping for, but that's us. So God's used this to give himself glory over and over and over. But we found, so the radar, so you watch, a radar like a weatherman would have. Here's this big red blob of tornado, and it comes to the camp, and then you see it literally like almost like an amoeba, a cell that like splits in half, and then it goes and back
You went
around
to
the
high
camp.
school.
I did.
Wow.
I'm not that big of a failure.
It
It literally parts and goes around the camp. And so, like, was Camp 2022 a failure? It kind of looked like it, but then you see what God sees, and it's like, whoa, God was so present there, maybe more than ever before. Literally, his finger landed on camp. And so God did great things. And so, and again, reiterating, God has received so much glory from our failure because he's, you know what I mean? So again, is our concern that we want things to go the way we want them to go? Or is our concern that God gets glory? That's kind of the question of this whole podcast. What do we care about? Our reputation or his reputation? Because a lot of times those two things will be in contradiction. They will be opposed to each other.
They should be.
They should be. And so sometimes God will say, you know what? I got to ruin this camp. Literally shred it to bits. But then I'm going to get lots of glory out of that. So the question is
It's
for
like
us
every few years.
No, Jimmy. The question is this. As staff of the NOYC, are we okay with that? Are we willing to say, you know what, God? Shred the camp. Take away the AC. Take away the electric. Take away the people. But if you get glory,
Also,
we're
I think
okay with
part of
failure.
it is that the story of 2022 camp is not finished yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Personally, that was my first time going. So we got there, Friday or Thursday morning?
Thursday or Friday, I don't remember.
I think it was Friday because
I told you 2022 didn't happen. I don't know what.
I think it was Friday because we weren't able to come in on Thursday, or
Okay.
you guys were
Okay.
able to come in, but we weren't able to do anything until Friday.
Right. So we were there for like 3 days before camp actually started. And like to me personally, that was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just to like be able to see everyone working together, you know what I mean, with one common goal in mind. You know what I mean? So while camp was cut short, to me personally, I was very fulfilled with what I got to experience, you know? So, but like I said, it's not over because like that was the biggest camp, you know, attendance wise. Okay. So it's almost like we're saying like we had 500 people. That was like the biggest ever. Like that's amazing. And God is sitting there like,
let me run them all off for you. Good job, God. Kudos. That's impressive.
not only that, but God's sitting there thinking like, oh, you had 500. Nice. You could have had 1,000. You could have had 10,000.
Right.
Like we think in such minuscule ways. Like when we do like when we did the nativity scene, I was talking to someone, I don't remember who it was, and they were like, you know, if one person walks away from here with a changed life, we did our job. And I'm like, why are we aiming for one? Like we should aim for everybody. You know?
Absolutely.
So I just think that story is not quite
I agree.
finished.
I think that you have to look at it from I think that it's always a learning point, correct? So like everything that you go through is a learning point. So in that moment, a lot of people learned that we have been doing this for a long time and we still don't have control.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so for us as staff and us as even the people that go, it doesn't always have to be that. It doesn't. It's not that. It's not a guaranteed.
Yeah.
This is not a guaranteed thing.
Right.
And we as staff members should be thankful that we get to be a part of it, that we get to do these things. And as people that come, you guys, you should be thankful that it's available.
Right. I think that brings up a good point. So like other, we honestly, full transparency, don't know a lot of other camps. So when I say other camps, I don't know any of them. But hypothetically, if there's another camp,
they exist.
Like you said, control. So it really is a bad thing if a camp gets control.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so say a week of camp goes off completely perfectly. Mm-hmm. And it goes off without a hitch. And it's squeaky clean. Every millisecond is perfect without any problems. That may mean that God wasn't in the picture.
Yeah.
Because that may mean the camp had full control, but God had no control.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it takes failure, just like 2022, to see God display his control and display our humility and lack of control.
Yep. Well, and I think that's the thing is, I think every single one of us here at the table, that I remember actually a very vivid moment was when it was, I think us three were behind the curtain. And
that's where we always are.
Yeah, but we were behind the curtain, and we had made the call.
Yeah.
And so, but us three were back there sobbing.
Yeah.
And somebody was like, "We just have a question of where something goes." You know what I mean? Like they want to, and they're like, "No, you go ahead." So like, I think that's the thing is like, I think it's easy to look at the situation and be like, "Oh, you guys just did what you wanted to do," but it hurt.
And I think it was painful. I think a lot of people who were at camp thought we gave up on God. Yeah. That's how they perceived it, was that we gave up. God he could have turned the electric back on. He could have gave us AC. Yeah. He could have cooled it down. We gave up on God. But again, is our concern getting what we want, or is our concern getting God glory? Because God may not want us to have the full week of camp like normal. He may want us to cut it short on Monday.
Yeah.
God's concern is not that we get our way or get what we want or get what we planned. God's concern is that he gets glory. Yep. Did he from this week? That week.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so, in my opinion, 2022 may have been one of the most successful years of camp in God's eyes ever.
Yeah.
Yep. Though it looked like total failure in every way. And so again, what is our foresight? What are we aiming for?
Yep.
So think about this as we wrap up today. Maybe this is the epitome of best examples in the Bible of what looks like a failure being turned into success. So we look at Jesus. Jesus for 32 and a half years, which is rather young, but for 32 and a half years, he travels this local region and he tells the world, I am God incarnate. I am God's son. We see him do miracles. We see him teach. We see him draw huge crowds and followings. We see him do the impossible. And the whole time, what is he saying? I am God's son. I am sent from above. I am God in the flesh. And then we get to Good Friday. And that same man is nailed to a cross. And this is what the Bible says. He died. Now, pause the story in that moment. It's so unfortunate we know the story so well. Like, it really is. But pause in that moment. What did Jesus look like? A failure. Yeah. Jesus looked like a failure. Everything you said, that was false. God can't die. Everything you proclaimed, he was mocked. He was ridiculed. He was embarrassed. He literally, not to be rated more than G.
What are the other ratings?
But Jesus was naked.
Yeah.
No clothing. That's embarrassing for man or God or both.
Yeah.
Like that on a cross in front of a huge... all the people he'd ministered to. You got to imagine the lame man was there. The blind man was there. Lazarus was there. All the people who ate the bread and the fish. The people who... all these people who had been a part of his ministry, who had followed, who had seen what he had done. And now he's naked, bleeding. And he ultimately dies on a cross. And so, again, even the disciples, the whole time they're thinking, this was all a lie. This was all made up. We gave our lives to this, and this is the end. We fell for a fraud. And yet, what do we find? Jesus himself was willing to humble himself to submit to God's will. What was God's will? Respectfully, if you allow it, God's will for Jesus was for Jesus to look like a failure. For those 3 days. For Jesus to look like a fraud for 3 days. To look like a liar for 3 days. Jesus had his reputation ran through the mud. Jesus had his ministry destroyed, shredded to pieces like a camp after a tornado. Why? So that God could get the glory. Because we know in 3 days what's going to happen. God's going to take what is a failure and turn it into something totally amazingly, the most epitome of fantastic. And so how many of us quit before Resurrection Sunday? We quit between the cross and the empty grave. How many of us quit between the pit and the palace? How many of us quit between Camp 2022 and Camp 2023? We're quitting before, as Kevin said, the story's finished. God gets the glory, even if it's at the expense of our failures.
Yep.
Because I like the instance you just used, I use a lot of times when talking about how God can take the worst day in history, okay, and make it the greatest day. And you know what I mean? Like, so if he can do that, okay, I don't know what everyone's lowest moment in their life was.
Camp 2022. No. I just told you.
There was 2014 as well.
That's my trivia question. You just ruined that.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry to set you up for that. That was like a, but so no matter where you are, no matter how dark your situation may be, God's not finished with you yet. Okay, like he's not gonna take you on this journey, and when you hit rock bottom, he's like, right, I'm done. Yeah. Like, figure this out, you know, on your own.
God never bails on us.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that, I think, is the epitome of Christianity. Yeah. I mean,
funny thing is, like, even zoom out a little bit before Jesus dies. So, spoiler alert, he's going to die. Before that, in his ministry, how many times did Jesus get in some really pickly situations? Yeah. Like, Jesus was on a sinking boat more than once.
Yeah.
Right.
Jesus was in lots of storms more than once.
Yeah.
Jesus saw, people throwing stones at him, like things that don't go good. And so, getting back to James' point, like, we expect, if we're living a godly life, we expect it to be a good, perfect life where we get our way. No. That was not Jesus.
No.
And he did Christianity perfectly.
Yep.
So, why do we expect our lives to be that way? Yeah. So, today's quote is by Tozer. Actually, ironically, I told you guys I did this backwards. The reason I did it backwards was I read the quote, and I'm like, that's my podcast, so I wrote it. So anyways, Tozer said this: "We can afford to follow him to failure. Faith dares to fail. The resurrection demonstrates before all who won and who lost. We can wait." That's a good quote. I like that.
Very good quote.
Today's considerable content, or it's considerable quote, featured content. That's what it is. Is actually going to be Big Daddy Weave. God is in the story.
Did not see that coming.
Wow. Kevin said that. I was like, that's the new song. Today's charge of challenge. So make a list of some past mistakes and failures, because we all got them. Whether it's self-inflicted sins or whether it's just things that didn't go right. And then honestly ask yourself, which is your priority? Your reputation or God's reputation? Your success or his success? Can you honestly say that God's glory is the priority of your life? And then I want you to pray that God would help you to trust his plan, even if it means pain and problems, even if it means going through failures. Trust him. Today's trivia question is this, ironically. Which year of camp has been coined by the NOYC staff as the year of failure at the NOYC?
I mean, most of them.
Most of them, yeah.
Spoiler alert, they're all correct now. There's one year that if you ask any of us who've been involved for a long time, we will tell you this year was the fail year of NOYC.
Very uncomfortable.
It was very uncomfortable. So, A, 2010, B, 2017, C, 2022, or D, 2014. Which year was coined the year of failure at the NOYC? And now we're going to have to share that story at some point because...
no, it's good to
we'll
leave.
just hide that, put that thing back where it came from.
Before we leave tonight. I mean, I'll find it off camera. But.
So last week, James gave us the question about how many questions did the sailors ask Jonah? Personal questions.
Yes.
And the answer was C. I don't know what the number was. 3? The C was the answer.
C was the answer.
Whatever the number was, the answer was C. And so...
I think it was 4.
4. Okay, C4. Bingo.
C4. Blow up.
You would.
C4.
You would. Hope you'll answer this week's trivia question. Comment below, and we'll give you the answer to that next week. But thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, would you do us a favor? Would you let us know that? Would you comment below? Make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, and even consider sending this podcast to a friend for encouragement. Because truth is, we all need encouraged in our times of failure and valleys. And so, until next time, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.